homeless man just saved her life. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't even give his name. That's why a billionaire couldn't look away.
The city moves fastest at 8 in the morning, when 900,000 people try to be somewhere else at the exact same time. Steam rises off manhole covers on 5th and Larkin. A bank's digital sign flips between the temperature and the time, as if reminding everyone twice a minute that they are already behind schedule. Commuters walk in straight lines, phones raised like compasses, following a rhythm nobody taught them, but everybody learned. It is a city built for people in a hurry. Walter Combs is not one of them. He sits against a newspaper box on the corner of Larkin, a block from the crosswalk that will change everything in 11 seconds he cannot yet imagine. He is 54 years old, though the past 11 months have tried to add a decade to his face. Every morning at 6, before the foot traffic starts, he folds his blanket into a precise square, corners matched, edges even. It is a small thing. It is the only thing, some mornings, that still feels like his to control. He washes his one good shirt in a gas station sink 2 blocks east, wringing it out with the same care a man might use on something breakable. He has a system. Nobody is grading him on it, and he keeps it anyway, because the alternative is letting go of the last version of himself he can still recognize. He does not talk about the accident. Not to the vendor who sometimes slides him a coffee. Not to the outreach worker who checks on him twice a month. Not even, most days, to himself. It sits somewhere behind his eyes, the way a splinter sits under skin long after the wound has closed over it. Invisible, until someone presses the wrong spot. At night, he sleeps in a covered alcove behind a shuttered hardware store, 3 blocks from the corner where he spends his days, because the overhang keeps the rain off and the store's old security light gives him just enough visibility to see anyone approaching before they see him. He learned that habit in his second week on the street, the hard way, and has not broken it since. A man alone learns quickly which small routines keep him safe and which ones are just for show. Walter has stopped confusing the two. He used to have a name in this city that meant something. Not a famous name, not one anyone outside a fairly small trade would recognize, but a name that opened doors when it needed to. Foreman talked about him the way carpenters talk about a level line. Reliable, unremarkable, exactly what you wanted and nothing you had to think twice about. That version of himself feels, most days, like a story about somebody else. He carries it anyway, the way a man carries a key to a house he no longer lives in, unsure why he hasn't thrown it out. There is an outreach worker named Priya who checks on Walter twice a month, part of a small nonprofit that covers this stretch of downtown. She has learned, over the past 11 months, not to push too hard on the questions Walter won't answer. She brings him information about a transitional housing program every few visits, and every few visits he tells her, politely, that he's still thinking about it. What he does not tell her is that the program requires an emergency contact, a next of kin, and he cannot bring himself to write his daughter's name on a form he isn't sure she'd still want attached to his. Priya has stopped asking why he hesitates. She has learned that some of the men and women on her caseload are not stuck because they lack options. They are stuck because the last time they trusted an option, it cost them almost everything they had left. The vendor on Larkin, a man named Ovidio who has run the same coffee cart for 11 years, hands Walter a cup most mornings without being asked. Walter never takes it without doing something in return. He sweeps the sidewalk in front of the cart with a broom Ovidio keeps leaned against the newspaper box specifically for him, though neither of them has ever said so out loud. It is an arrangement built entirely on things left unspoken, which suits Walter fine. He has grown careful with words. Words, in his experience, are the thing people use right before they take something from you. A teenager drops a $5 bill outside the pharmacy one afternoon, hurrying toward a bus that is already pulling from the curb. Walter picks it up and chases 4 blocks before catching him at the next stop, breathless, holding it out. He has not eaten since the previous morning. He does not consider, even briefly, keeping it. This is not a performance. There is no one watching. That is precisely the point of who Walter Combs still is, 11 months into losing nearly everything else. 2 miles from Ovidio's cart, on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the intersection at 9th and Colby, Richard Ashford is on a call he does not want to be on. He is 62, a man whose name appears in finance publications more often than his face does. A man who built an investment empire on the principle that trust is a liability until it is proven otherwise. He learned that principle the hard way, years earlier, in a manner he has never discussed publicly and rarely discusses privately. 2 decades ago, before the tower, before the name that now appears in finance publications, Ashford took a chance on a partner he trusted more than his own instincts told him to. The man had a good story, a convincing handshake, and a business plan that looked sound on paper. By the time Ashford understood what was actually happening to the company's books, he had lost most of what he built to that point, along with something harder to rebuild than capital: his willingness to believe a stranger's intentions matched their words. He rebuilt the company. He never fully rebuilt the other thing. Every decision he has made since has run first through a filter built entirely out of that one betrayal, and it has served him well in business and poorly, if he is honest with himself, in almost everything else. The intersection below his window is notorious among locals, 6 lanes wide, with a crossing signal that gives pedestrians barely enough time to make it across before the light turns against them. Ashford has watched 100 near misses from this window over the years and stopped registering them the way a man stops hearing traffic after he's lived beside it long enough. He is staring out that window now, not because he expects to see anything, but because the call has gone long and boring and his eyes have nowhere better to land. Eleanor Whitfield is 81 years old, and she is talking to her late husband again, the way she does most afternoons without quite meaning to. She carries a canvas grocery bag heavier than her doctor would approve of, gripping her cane in the other hand, telling Walter she does not know his name yet, nothing at all, because she has not noticed him. She has noticed almost no one today. Her mind is half a block behind her body, still finishing a sentence she started saying to a man who has been gone 6 years. She is alone. No family walks beside her. No one has offered to carry the bag, and there is a reason for that the story has not reached yet. The crossing signal is already counting down when she steps off the curb. A cyclist swerves around her without slowing. Half a block up, a delivery truck accelerates through a light that has just turned yellow, clearly not planning to stop for it. Eleanor's cane catches the lip of a pothole. She stumbles into the lane. The truck is closing the distance in a way that will not resolve in her favor. A single second stretches out longer than it should. The driver's eyes still on his mirror rather than the road ahead. The brake lights of the car in front of him coming on a half-beat too late. Eleanor's cane skittering out from under her hand and clattering against the asphalt somewhere she can no longer see it. Nobody else on the corner has clocked what is happening yet. A woman 2 feet away is scrolling through something on her phone, headphones in, entirely elsewhere. A man in a suit steps around Eleanor's dropped cane without breaking stride, assuming, if he thinks about it at all, that someone else will handle it. No one else does. 40 feet away, sitting against the newspaper box on what looks like an ordinary corner of an ordinary morning, Walter Combs is the only person on that block actually watching Eleanor rather than a screen. He has been invisible for 11 months, has trained himself to take up as little space in the world as possible, has learned that most people's eyes slide past him the way water slides past a stone in a riverbed. But his own eyes have not stopped working. He sees her stumble half a second before anyone else does. He is moving before he has decided to move. He crosses 40 feet faster than a man his age and his circumstances should reasonably be able to, closes the last few steps at something close to a sprint, and pulls Eleanor back onto the curb a half second before the truck side mirror clips the exact space where she had been standing. The sound of the horn arrives late, the way sound sometimes does when the danger has already passed. There is no crowd gathering. There is no cinematic hush. Most of the people on that corner never look up from their phones at all, simply routing around the two of them the way water routes around any obstruction, and continuing on toward wherever they were already late to be. Eleanor is shaking, both hands pressed to her chest, and Walter steadies her by the shoulders until her breathing settles into something closer to normal. She thanks him 3 times before she manages to reach into her coat pocket and press a folded $20 bill into his palm. Walter closes her fingers back around it and pushes her hand gently away. "You don't owe me anything," he says. "Just watch that pothole." She insists again. He refuses again, quieter this time, and walks her the rest of the way to a bench near the corner, sitting with her until the color returns to her face and her hands stop trembling. Then he returns to his spot by the newspaper box, and the morning simply continues, the way mornings do, indifferent to what almost happened inside them. 40 stories above, a man who has not moved from his window in several minutes lowers his phone slightly and watches the entire thing play out in miniature. The stumble, the sprint, the refusal, the $20 bill folded twice and returned. He watches Walter walk Eleanor to the bench and sit with her, patient, unhurried, asking nothing. Richard Ashford has seen a great many things from that window over the years. He has never seen a man turn down free money from someone who clearly would have paid it gladly. His first instinct is not admiration. It is suspicion. Ashford has been the target of staged kindness before. Men and women who manufacture a rescue, a crisis, a moment of manufactured decency, purely to be seen doing it by someone with money to give. It cost him, once, more than he has ever told a reporter, and it taught him a rule he has never broken since. Generosity, without verification, gets men like him destroyed. He ends the call he no longer cares about mid-sentence and picks up a different phone. "Give me everything on the man at the corner of 9th and Colby," he says. "Before I do anything else, I want to know exactly who he is." It takes his security team 3 days to build the file, and what they find does not match the story Ashford was braced for. 18 months earlier, Walter Combs was a construction foreman, steady, respected, the kind of employee whose name appeared in safety reports as a formality because nothing ever went wrong on his sites. He had raised a daughter alone since his wife's death years before, worked long hours to keep the two of them afloat, and by every account in the file, was exactly the man his co-workers described. Careful, honest, difficult to rattle. Then came the incident. A worker on one of his sites was seriously injured when a support brace failed, a brace that had been signed off as compliant weeks earlier by someone above Walter's authority, though the paperwork, when it surfaced afterward, told a different story. Someone had falsified the safety inspection to avoid the cost of a proper fix. When the lawsuit came, someone needed to have been the foreman who missed it. The injured worker, a young apprentice named Dale who had only been on the crew 4 months, spent 3 weeks in the hospital and longer than that relearning how to grip a tool with a hand that no longer closed the way it used to. Walter visited him twice before the company's lawyers advised against further contact, worried it would be read as an admission. He never got the chance to tell Dale it wasn't his fault, and he has wondered, more nights than he'd like to count, whether Dale ever learned the truth of what really happened to that brace, or whether he still carries the same misplaced blame Walter was made to carry publicly. That someone was Walter. He was fired within a week, blacklisted informally across a local trade small enough that reputations travel faster than resumes. Within 4 months, he had lost the apartment. Within 6, his daughter, 16 at the time, was living with her late mother's sister 2 states away because Walter could not watch her sleep in a car and call that protecting her. He let her go voluntarily. He has told himself every day since that it was the right decision, and some days he almost believes it. He has not spoken to her in over a year, not out of anger, but out of a shame too specific to explain to anyone who has not stood exactly where he stood. Her name is Grace. She is 19 now, finishing her 2nd year of community college 2 states away, working a part-time job at a campus bookstore to help cover what her aunt cannot. In the years since the calls between them stopped, she has never once believed her father simply gave up on her, whatever the silence might have looked like from the outside. She has spent long stretches of that year calling shelters in the city where she last knew him to live, describing him to strangers on the other end of a phone line, getting the same answer every time. No record of anyone by that name, or a record that went cold months earlier when he moved on from a shelter that could no longer take him. She keeps a folder on her laptop, still, of every number she has tried and crossed off. Ashford's team also pulls the settlement records from the lawsuit itself, and the numbers tell their own quiet story. The company paid out just enough to keep the case from going to trial, structured the payment so the fault fell squarely on the site foreman named in the incident report, and closed the file within 4 months, fast enough that nobody outside the company ever had reason to look closer. Reyes's name appears nowhere in the public record. Walter's does, twice, in language that makes him sound careless in a way none of his former co-workers ever described him. Ashford reads the file twice, seated alone in an office 40 stories above the corner where all of this started. He has spent 30 years reading files built to make ordinary men look either better or worse than they are. This one does neither. It simply confirms, methodically, that Walter Combs did not perform decency for a stranger's $20 on a Tuesday morning. He had already lost nearly everything he had, and it had not moved him an inch from who he already was. Ashford does not go down to the street himself. Not yet. He sends an intermediary, a contact from an unrelated shell company, no explanation offered, with a short-term day labor job, 3 days of work, cash at the end of it. It is framed to Ashford's own team as one final test, though even he could not fully explain what he expects it to prove. Walter almost turns it down. A man in a clean suit offering paid work to someone sleeping against a newspaper box has, in his experience, usually got an angle. He has been burned by people with more power than him before, and the burn leaves a specific kind of caution behind. The kind that makes free opportunities look more dangerous than no opportunity at all. What tips him is a memory, unbidden, of his daughter, years earlier, needling him about giving up on people too fast, laughing at him for it the way teenagers laugh at the parts of their parents they secretly admire. He takes the job to prove something to a version of himself she still might recognize, if she saw him now. The site turns out to be smaller than the one that ended his career, but the shape of the danger is nearly identical. A rushed timeline, a supervisor eager to cut a corner, a stack of paperwork that needs a signature confirming a safety check that has not actually been done properly. The supervisor tells Walter, not quite as a threat, but close enough, that his pay for the 3 days depends on getting this signed off by end of day. Walter looks at the brace in question for a long moment. Then he sets the clipboard down and signed, and tells the supervisor he won't put his name on something he hasn't verified. He walks off the site convinced he has simply lost another job the way he lost the last one, for refusing to look away from something that mattered. The report reaches Ashford within the hour, and it tells him exactly what the file predicted it would. But it arrives alongside a second piece of information that changes the shape of everything that follows. The contractor responsible for falsifying the original safety records on Walter's old site, a man named Gordon Reyes, has resurfaced. He is bidding, under a different company name, on a project connected to one of Ashford's own portfolio holdings. He has a pitch meeting scheduled for Friday. The story that began as one man's quiet rescue of a stranger on a crosswalk has, without either of them fully realizing it, been running 2 threads at once. On Friday, in a boardroom 40 stories above the corner where it started, those 2 threads are about to meet. Gordon Reyes arrives at the pitch confident, well-dressed, entirely unaware of any connection between his host and a foreman. He stopped thinking about the moment the lawsuit was settled. He speaks for nearly 10 minutes about his company's safety record, its careful compliance history, Its zero-incident guarantee on every site it has run in the past 2 years. Ashford lets him finish. He has learned, across 3 decades of negotiations, that the most useful thing a man can do is let an opponent talk long enough to dig his own hole without noticing the shovel in his hand. When Reyes finishes, Ashford slides a single folder across the table. Inside it, the original falsified inspection report, the documentation his team quietly obtained proving who altered it and when, and a photograph of the man who took the fall for it, standing on a street corner 2 miles from this room. Reyes denies it first, the way men in his position always do. Then he minimizes it. A paperwork oversight, nothing more, blown out of proportion by an unlucky accident that could have happened to anyone. Finally, when the denial and the minimizing both collapse under the weight of what is sitting in front of him, he says the thing that reveals exactly how little Walter Combs ever mattered to him. It would have bankrupted the company either way, he says. Somebody had to take it. He had a 16-year-old daughter, Ashford says. Reyes has no answer for that. It is the first time in the meeting his composure fully leaves him. Not because he feels the weight of what he did, Ashford suspects, but because he had never once considered that detail worth remembering in the first place. He starts to say something about how business decisions are never personal, and stops himself halfway through, perhaps recognizing how it will sound spoken out loud in a room with Walter's photograph sitting between them. Ashford does not raise his voice. He tells Reyes, in the same even tone he might use to close any other meeting, that the falsified documentation is being forwarded to the State Labor Board that afternoon, and that his bid is withdrawn from consideration, effective immediately. There is no threat in it. There does not need to be. The system Reyes tried to manipulate once is about to do, belatedly, exactly what it was designed to do. Gordon Reyes spent 18 months believing Walter Combs was simply a man who could not handle pressure. It takes Richard Ashford 11 minutes to unmake that story completely. For the first time since any of this began, Ashford leaves the tower and walks down to the street himself. He finds Walter back at his usual corner, having assumed, like most things lately, that the 3-day job had simply evaporated along with everything else. Walter does not recognize him. To Walter, he is just another well-dressed stranger, and there have been enough of those in the past 11 months that he no longer expects any of them to matter. Ashford does not open with an offer. He opens with the crosswalk, describing, in plain terms, what he saw from his window that morning. The stumble, the sprint, the $20 bill folded and pushed back into an old woman's hand without a second thought. Something moves in Walter's face at that. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to relief. The specific relief of learning that one part of himself the world had stopped noticing had, in fact, been seen. Then Ashford tells him the rest. That his investigators located Walter's daughter, now 19, who has spent the past year trying and failing to find her father after 2 moves with her aunt left the trail cold on both ends. Rather than explain further, Ashford holds out a phone, already ringing. Walter takes it with a hand that is not entirely steady. Her voice breaks on his name before he manages to say anything back. For several seconds, neither of them can finish a sentence. It is not a cinematic reunion. It is raw and unfinished and entirely real, the kind of moment that does not need decoration to land. She asks him where he's been. He tells her the truth, plainly, without the softened version he'd rehearsed for exactly this moment more times than he'd admit. A newspaper box on Larkin, a folded blanket every morning, a system built to survive rather than live. She cries harder at the honesty than she would have at any excuse he might have offered instead. She tells him she called every shelter she could find a number for, that she kept the list, that she never once believed he had simply let her go. Walter sits down on the bench beside Eleanor's, the phone still pressed to his ear long after there is nothing left to say, unwilling to be the one who ends the call. What Ashford offers him afterward is not a check. It is a position overseeing safety compliance across every construction site in Ashford's portfolio, a role built specifically around the one thing Reyes tried to erase from Walter's record: his refusal to sign off on anything he has not verified himself. Walter hesitates. He tells Ashford he does not want charity dressed up as a job. Ashford's answer is short. He tells him it isn't charity. It's the only resume that has actually mattered to him in 15 years of hiring. A man who walked off a job rather than put his name to something false, twice, with nothing to gain either time. Eleanor Whitfield asks to meet him again once she learns who he is. She and Walter have stayed in touch in the months since. An unlikely friendship formed in 11 seconds on a crosswalk neither of them has forgotten. She tells him, more than once, that she has thought about that morning nearly every day since it happened, and that she intends to keep thanking him for it for as long as he'll let her. She insists, eventually, on cooking him dinner at her apartment, and over the meal she tells him about her husband, and Walter tells her, for the first time out loud to anyone, the version of the accident he never gave to Priya or Ovidio or anyone else who asked. Eleanor listens without interrupting, and when he finishes, she simply says that she isn't surprised, not even a little, that a man like that was the one who happened to be watching when her cane caught the pothole. Months later, Walter is stable, housed, working steadily, and slowly rebuilding what was broken with his daughter. Not instantly, not perfectly, but repaired one visit and one phone call at a time, the way real things get rebuilt rather than the way movies pretend they do. Grace visits on weekends when her class schedule allows it, and on the first weekend she sees his new apartment, small, sparse, entirely his. She doesn't say much about it at all. She just stands in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, the way people do when they're memorizing something they were afraid they'd never get to see. On his first week overseeing safety compliance across Ashford's construction sites, Walter walks every one of them personally rather than relying on the reports handed to him. He checks braces with his own hands. He talks to the crews the way a foreman talks to men he respects, not the way an executive talks to people beneath him. And within a month the sites under his review have a reputation among the crews as the ones where nobody has to choose between a paycheck and a shortcut. It is, in its own quiet way, the exact opposite of what was done to him. Gordon Reyes, meanwhile, faces the consequences the labor board investigation eventually hands down, consequences that arrive quietly, through the proper channels, without spectacle. His company loses its bidding eligibility on public contracts for 3 years. It is not the kind of ending that makes headlines. It is the kind that simply closes a door that should have been closed 18 months earlier. Walter Combs was never invisible. The city was simply too busy to look. Somewhere in every city, right now, someone like him is being walked past by people with somewhere else to be. A stranger folding a blanket into a precise square at 6 in the morning. A stranger returning money nobody would have blamed him for keeping. A stranger whose entire character is sitting in plain sight on a street corner nobody slows down long enough to actually see. The only difference in this particular story is that, for once, somebody happened to be looking out the right window at the right moment and decided that what he saw was worth 3 days of finding out the truth. It cost Richard Ashford 3 days and one uncomfortable meeting to learn who Walter Combs really was. It had cost Walter 11 months, an apartment, a career, and a daughter's voice on the other end of a silent phone line to prove it without ever meaning to. Somewhere between those two costs sits the entire point of the story, that the measure of a man is rarely taken in the moment everyone is watching, but in the 11 months nobody was.